In this episode of the Aging Well podcast, my guest is Dr. Christopher Rhodes, co-founder and CEO of Mimio Health. In episode 196, Dr. Rhodes shared insights into how fasting and fasting mimicking diets can profoundly influence cellular processes, boost metabolic health, and potentially extend lifespan. He returns in this episode to update us on the research into fasting biomimetics and how these may improve hunger, appetite control, glucose levels, cholesterol levels, and more. Whether you're curious about optimizing your health or looking for innovative ways to age well, this episode offers valuable perspectives from a leader in the field. Well, Dr. Rhodes, welcome back to the Aging Well podcast. Let's begin by having you just kind of refresh our viewers and listeners on Mimeo Health and fasting mimetics, and even a little bit more about kind of who you are and what you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Chris Rhodes, got my PhD in nutritional biochemistry at UC Davis, and I'm also the CEO and scientific founder of Mimeo Health. And Mimeo is a biomimetic supplement company. So basically what that means is we study actual human biology in these interesting regenerative states of the body, whether that's fasting or exercise or sleep or cold exposure, things like that, and basically try to tease out what's happening in the body during these interesting regenerative states, and is there a way that we can recreate those benefits, but on demand in supplement form, rather than having to, let's say, fast for 36 hours, right? So our first product is Mimeo. It's a fasting mimetic, like you said, and it was designed from 7 years of clinical research into human fasting. And basically what we found there was that when people fast for 36 hours, there's this unique set of molecules that are produced by the body that are really only elevated during a fast. And we found that those were the ones responsible for activating a lot of these beneficial cellular health and longevity effects of fasting. So we basically isolated those molecules, put them into a daily supplement so that you can basically recreate fasting at the molecular level, get those same benefits, but without actually having to fast. And that's Mimeo.
And why is fasting an important factor in aging well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fasting is one of the only methods that we know of right now to reliably extend lifespan in model organisms. And generally, the best that we see with that is the approach of alternate day fasting. So, one day of normal eating, 1 day of fasting, 1 day of normal eating, 1 day of fasting, repeated throughout an organism's entire life. And what that usually equates to is around, these periods of 36 hours of fasting, right? And you can have water in between those. Fluids are always, permitted during fasting. And you can see anywhere between a 30 to 80% lifespan extension in these model organisms, depending on what the animal is, with fasting and without having to reduce calories, which is really interesting. When you dive even deeper into the beneficial effects of fasting, it goes beyond lifespan as well, because it's also treating healthspan. So it's helping to treat, prevent, or delay most major diseases. There's the really robust history around it for neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular disease, things like that. So basically, you name it, fasting has been shown to help with it. So that was really interesting to me as a scientist and a researcher when I got into the healthy aging and longevity space. It was very much like, here's this one thing that does everything. And it's not something that you're adding into the system, right? It's not a superfood or a wonder drug, but somehow fasting is activating this, beneficial, as I call it, longevity bio program, basically optimizing all of your cellular functionalities for health, regeneration, and survival. So that was one of the reasons why fasting was really, really compelling to me as something that we need to, research and tease out and see if there is a way that we can activate all those same benefits on demand.
Now, I know I probably asked this in our previous conversation, but for those who might have missed it, can you explain how Mimeo Health's technology supports cellular health and longevity, and how it differs from fasting and other fasting mimicking approaches? I know we
Sure.
talked about some of the other approaches in that previous conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mimeo is a fasting mimetic in the very true sense of the term. It is taking what your body would naturally do during a fast and giving it back to you in supplement form. So, we're literally just mimicking what your body would naturally do during a fast. And then those molecules go on to have their own bioactive abilities and activate these cellular benefits of fasting. So that's very distinct from anything else that is on the market. We're the only company in the supplement space right now that's taking this biomimetic approach, right? Actually studying what happens in humans and trying to find ways to recreate that. And other products that are out there, fasting mimicking diet is the major one, Prolon, right? And how we're different from Prolon is essentially that Prolon is a 5-day nutritional cleanse essentially. So, they're giving you 5 days worth of these, pre-made nutrition health meal plan packets kind of thing. The caveat to that is that they're giving you something in the range of 700 to 1,000 calories per day. So it is very severe caloric restriction. So the way that the fasting mimicking diet, mimics fasting is by number one, really, really reducing calories, right? Kind of almost like you are fasting. And then they give you a specific set of foods and nutrients that have been dialed in to not activate your, or not break your fast, essentially. So not activate your carbohydrate metabolism or your fat metabolism, things that would, ordinarily physiologically take your body out of a fast. So with Prolon, it's a 5-day program where you're getting really reduced calories and taking in this special diet versus Mimeo that is taking what your body would naturally produce during a fast and just giving it back to you so that you can get those same benefits even when you are eating. You don't have to change your lifestyle. You don't have to change your diet in any way. So it's a daily consistent supplement that you would take rather than a 5-day meal plan.
So, from a cellular perspective, what are the differences between intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting?
It's a great question. So, fasting definitely has a gradation of effects depending on how long you do it, right? And a lot of that comes down to the fact that it takes around 20 to 24 hours in order for your body to deplete your glycogen stores, which are essentially your stored carbohydrates in your body. So, up until that 20 to 24-hour mark, you're not going to see dramatically different changes in your biochemistry, your metabolism, how your physiology really works and operates because your body's going to be harvesting glucose, which is what it prefers to use from all of these glycogen stores and kind of using that as your primary fuel source. Once you deplete those glycogen stores at around 20 to 24 hours, that's when you really get into the initial stages of, true physiological fasting. So you don't have any more glucose stores to draw on anymore. Your body's going to start mobilizing fat, using that to produce ketones, and then have this big metabolic switch that happens from that fed state carbohydrate metabolism into fasting, ketosis, and this energy restriction metabolism. As you progress further into fasting, things kind of change even more, and we don't have a ton of great scientific data about what really happens in the body after around 72 hours worth of fasting. But after that 24-hour mark, as you progress, you'll basically see greater and greater anti-inflammatory effects. These effects on immune cell regeneration and stem cell progenation. You'll see increases in autophagy that happen, which is essentially our cellular cleanup and recycling programs. A lot of these metabolic efficiency pathways that are being turned on to try and conserve energy, right? And make sure that without food, we're continuing to survive. So it's a lot of kind of like a reset to homeostasis for your system. We're not having all of these external factors that are, really disrupting the system, right? So we can get back to, all right, we're just going to focus on maintaining, cleaning, repairing, and the survival of the cells that we do have because we don't have enough energy to make a new cell if something goes wrong.
So really the reason we have you on the podcast again is to talk a little bit more about some of this new research that you all have been doing. So Mimeo recently partnered with, was it People
People
Science
science, yeah.
in a random controlled study. Can you give us kind of a high level overview of the study and its purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the progression of Mimeo science, this is our third clinical study. So our first clinical study was essentially our discovery study, where we looked at what happens in the body during a 36-hour fast. We were able to identify the Mimeo formulation and show that it can recreate these cellular health benefits of fasting in human cells, and then also extend the lifespan in model organisms by 96%. So basically doubling their lifespan just through supplementation. That was kind of our original clinical study. We were really excited about those results. The next step for us was our second clinical study, which is called a pilot study, basically just making sure that, all right, let's take these molecules, let's actually give them to people, make sure that they show up in circulation, that they're properly absorbed, that they're utilized, and see what their short-term effects are. So what we did for that study was we had people come in, eat a standardized breakfast with a placebo control, and looked at their plasma functionalities. And then we had those same people come back after a washout period, eat that same standardized breakfast, but then with supplementation with Mimeo. And what we saw there was that when people ate alongside the placebo, there was this big loss in their plasma and cellular functionalities, which is really, really common. It's part of the postprandial state, the post-eating state. So when you think about it, you have a lot of nutrients and foreign molecules that are coming into the system when we eat, kind of throwing the system into metabolic chaos, knocking us out of homeostasis, creating these pro-inflammatory responses. So it's not great for optimal cellular functioning. So we saw that their plasma became pro-inflammatory and less antioxidant and less cardioprotective. But when they ate that same meal, but then with supplementation with Mimeo, we were able to not only prevent all of that loss of function, but then add gains of function on top of that, that mimicked what we saw when people fasted. So instead of being pro-inflammatory, their plasma became anti-inflammatory and antioxidant and cardioprotective, which was really amazing. So we were able to show in that study that the ingredients are bioavailable; they can be absorbed. We know what their pharmacokinetics, as it's called, are, and then we were also able to show that even in the short term, we can recreate these beneficial effects of fasting, even when people are eating. And so that launched us into, all right, we know that it works in human cells. We know that it has these longevity effects. We know that we can mimic fasting even during a meal in the short term. What are the longer term benefits that we might be able to get from this formulation? And that is our latest third clinical study. And for that one, we looked at just normal, healthy, older folks, 50 to 75 years old, an equal distribution of men and women. We had 42 people total in the study. And this was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, just looking at what happens when people take Mimeo for 8 weeks or a placebo for 8 weeks. And what we saw there was really, really impressive. We were basically able to show that with 8 weeks of supplementation, we had really dramatic improvements to hunger control, satiety, reduced cravings, reduced food noise, less overall and maximal daily hunger. So a lot of these, appetite control benefits, we were able to show that we could reduce intestinal pain and bloating over those 8 weeks. And then really significantly, when we're looking at the blood markers, we can also see a lot of metabolic control factors that are happening as well. So we were able to improve fasting glucose levels. We were able to improve total cholesterol levels, LDL cholesterol levels, specifically LDL particle number, which is even more indicative of cardiovascular disease risk. And then we were able to improve overall oxidative stress status as well. So basically, how stressed are your cells? It's one of the primary reasons that we age is an accumulation of oxidative stress and damage over time. So being able to reduce that is really kind of showing you the longevity potential of the molecules themselves. So, we're really, really happy to be able to get these both, pretty significant metabolic health effects, these cardioprotective effects, and these longevity effects from this new 8-week clinical study.
So were there any results that were kind of unexpected or anything that really stood out at you as a bit more surprising or just a bit more exciting than you thought it would be?
Yeah, we definitely didn't expect to see the reductions in bloating and abdominal pain, right? Because that was something that we were asking, but it wasn't like a primary outcome that we were like, yes, we know that Mimeo does these things. So that was probably the most interesting to look at. And then the appetite control element of it too. It's not totally surprising. The oleoyl ethanolamide, OEA, that's in Mimeo has been shown in previous clinical studies to have these appetite suppression effects. But what was really interesting to see when you looked at the data was how that kind of manifests itself. So when we think about, hunger control, we're thinking about like, okay, cool, I took it and I immediately had this big drop in hunger or this big increase in satiety, right? Like I can't eat as much, I feel fuller longer, or I'm just like not hungry at all. And there is that effect, but it's like a subtle day-to-day kind of thing. So when we look at the daily hunger inputs, what we saw was that when we started the study, they were pretty high and then got significantly lower over time. But within that day to day, there's a lot of ups and downs, right? So as you're constantly, it's kind of like walking a staircase, right? It's like, okay, down, 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 but it's not a totally like straight line. And that was probably the most interesting piece of the data to see because it does very much reflect how consumers can sometimes describe the product, right? It's like they don't notice the day-to-day differences because from one day to the next, it's a little step down. It's not a huge change. But when you look at the data over those 8 weeks, it does become a huge change, even if people don't, naturally even notice it. And that is, I think, a really good just, metaphor, analogy, example of how supplements and cellular health kind of work in general, right? It's like even when you don't notice these, severe day-to-day, hour-to-hour differences that are happening, when things are working at the cellular level, you'll see that, change over time.
So refresh the listener too. How does Mimeo mimic the effects of fasting at the biochemical level? I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, but just to kind of really clarify to them what's going on as they take the supplement.
Yeah. So what's going on is essentially Mimeo has 4 ingredients in it that we identified were elevated in the body during a 36-hour fast. And we found that each of those molecules individually could mimic a certain or recreate a certain facet of fasting, right? So spermidine, for example, is really well known for helping to support and enhance autophagy. NAD, the nicotinamide that we have in there, it's an NAD precursor. That's really well known for enhancing NAD levels, which then goes on to kind of promote a lot of these epigenetic and translational changes that are supportive of this, fasting and caloric restriction, energy restriction pathways that help lead to these metabolic efficiency things and survival within cells. So what Mimeo is doing is basically, taking these molecules that we identified from the fasting state and then further identified have these synergistic effects together to activate these complementary pathways in order to recreate what would happen in a cell in the body during an actual 36-hour fast. So kind of what we were talking about before, the nicotinamide that's in Mimeo is working to enhance NAD levels. NAD is the primary energy sensing molecule within cells. So if you have a high proportion of NAD plus, that's basically a signal to your cells that there's not a lot of energy around. So we need to turn on these energy restriction and recycling mechanisms, these metabolic efficiency pathways that ultimately help lead to survival. What spermidine is doing is activating autophagy, which is also what you would see in fasting. The palmitoyl ethanolamide that's in Mimeo is essentially kind of like your body's rest and repair molecule. So it has a lot of these immunomodulatory effects, reducing inflammation, helping to reduce pain, working through COX-1 and 2 inhibition, so kind of like your body's natural ibuprofen to a certain degree. But what's also really interesting is that it's part of the endocannabinoid system. So it's also signaling through CB1 and CB2 receptors. So kind of like your body's natural CBD at the same time. It has these mood enhancement effects. It has these cognition enhancement effects. It has this really profound effect on neuroinflammation. So that's kind of operating as this, anti-inflammatory portion of what fasting can do. And then finally, we have the oleoyl ethanolamide that's in Mimeo, the OEA, and that's basically serving as a stand-in for the metabolic effects that you would experience during a fast. So what's really interesting about OEA is that when it was originally identified, it was identified as a satiety factor after people ate a meal. So it would increase about 1 to 2 hours after taking a meal, but then disappear after that. And people thought that that was the only time that OEA was really upregulated, just as a way to help, tell your body, okay, there's food in the system, so we don't have to eat anymore. What we found was that it was really, really highly upregulated also in fasting. And we think that this is basically an evolutionary adaptation so that your body doesn't feel like painfully hungry all the time when you're fasting, right? Because that's not a great way to support an organism's health. It's like, all right, great, there's no food around. We're going to cripple you with hunger so that you can't go out there and find berries or hunt down that gazelle or whatever it is. So during fasting, you get this big spike in OEA as your body's natural way to say, all right, we're not going to be hungry, so that you can focus on doing the things that you actually have to do to survive, which is really, really cool. So OEA is producing those satiety effects, those appetite suppression effects, but then also activating PPAR alpha, which is essentially telling cells and telling your body to prioritize fat metabolism and beta oxidation. So basically helping your cells get that metabolic switch that happens during a fast as well. So all these things are kind of coming together to, like I said, activate these complementary pathways and then recreate these cellular effects, these cellular benefits, and then these whole body benefits that you would experience during fasting, but can now get just through supplementation.
Okay, I'm geeking out on all this because I'm a PhD too. And, a lot of our listeners are probably sitting there thinking, okay, you guys are doctors. You know this stuff. You're throwing all these chemical words at us and these biochemical pathways and everything else. What can you tell the average listener, if you take Mimeo, this is what you can expect in your body, and this is going to be the long-term effects of taking this supplement?
That's a great question too. There's a lot of answers to that. So I love doing my job as a scientist for Mimeo and working with these molecules and these ingredients specifically because they're so well clinically validated. There's over 100 studies that have looked at the individual ingredients on their own and kind of their efficacies across a wide range of conditions and indications. So there's a ton of things that people could experience and could expect from Mimeo. Based on the clinical studies that we've done, the major things that people can expect are this appetite suppression effect, this improvement in digestion and digestive symptoms, but then also the balancing of a lot of these very important cardiometabolic risk factors like the glucose levels and the cholesterol levels, the LDL levels, the ox-LDL levels, the oxidative stress levels, the total antioxidant capacity of the plasma, right? So we're really creating these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, cardioprotective effects, right? And beyond that, we've also seen from the clinical studies with the individual ingredients that there are these cognitive enhancement effects. There's these muscle performance, exercise performance, and recovery benefits to it. There can be a weight loss benefit as well. There can be a strength increase and energy increase coming from the NAD levels. And then spermidine is usually a little bit more of the subtler one, right? Like since it's promoting autophagy. It's kind of activating more at the cellular level and less at the physiological level. But there have been some clinical studies there showing enhancement in cognition, memory, and focus as well. So that's kind of what people can expect from Mimeo, is that it's basically helping to merge these metabolic benefits together with the cellular health and longevity benefits. And how that manifests typically is with the appetite suppression effects, the energy enhancement effects, the cognitive enhancement effects, and then also for people who have kind of those aches and pains of getting older, right? If it's, osteoarthritis or just, general wear and tear in the system, usually you can see a lot of pain relief there as well. And that's coming from the palmitoyl ethanolamide, which has been really well clinically validated for its ability to behave as a natural pain relief.
So in a nutshell, you can say it'll help the individual age well.
Exactly. And it will help them age well. It will optimize your metabolism for longevity.
Yeah, I mean, listening to this, it's like the long-term benefits are so important there. I mean, you are going to have a suppressed appetite, so you're going to tend to eat less, which makes it a little bit more easier to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight, but also to be in that more chronically caloric restricted state, but also to be able to up the metabolism in ways that you're going to benefit cell health and cognitive health, and the list goes on and on and on.
Right.
So it's really kind of exciting to kind of listen to all this. And so this was a study that included 42 healthy overweight men and women with elevated HbA1c levels.
Yep.
The sample size was probably a little bit too small, but were there any notable differences in the results based on demographics like age or gender?
Yeah, we didn't see any differences based on age or gender. It seemed to pretty well work for everybody, which was great. One major thing that we did see is that, and that's like another interesting thing that we didn't really expect. It works better in women for the appetite suppression effects than it does for men, even though everybody, there wasn't any significant differences. But what we saw was that women hit more metrics than men did in terms of being able to feel that appetite suppression and increase in satiety. And I think that that's really important to note, because what we hear all the time anecdotally in the fasting world is that women have a much harder time fasting than men do. And because, there's all this influence of the hormonal cycles, the menstrual cycle on how women experience hunger and how women, experience just like day-to-day biochemistry, right? Mimeo has also, on our side, been really helpful for helping women to enhance their fasts, or get more benefits from their intermittent fasting, or just help make fasting itself easier. So that's something that we see all the time, is that we have women come to us who are like, I really want to try intermittent fasting, I really want the benefits of it, but I just find it really difficult to do, and I get really hungry really quickly. And when I take Mimeo, that just kind of goes away. So I can actually do like a 1 meal a day program if I want to, or I can just, do the intermittent fasting and not be so miserable all the time.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because, I guess you think of with women, it is going to be naturally protective to not eating, right? Because you want to be, if you're going to be reproductive, you got to be in a healthy state. You have to have nutrients.
Right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
So don't want to not eat. So how do these findings compare to traditional fasting methods in terms of the health benefits?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I would say that, fasting in and of itself, especially if you're doing something in the range of these deeper states of fasting, right? A 36-hour fast, a 48-hour fast, a 72-hour fast, those are going to be more powerful interventions than Mimeo on its own, right? Especially if you're taking Mimeo alongside food, because what's basically happening in that system, as we saw in our second clinical study, is that eating in and of itself has a lot of these negative impacts on inflammatory status, antioxidant status, metabolic status, right? So we're almost constantly in that fed state, especially in the Western world, where we have our 3 meals a day plus snacks, right? It takes around 4 to 6 hours in order for the body to resolve those negative effects of the postprandial state and return back to homeostasis. So when we think about that 3 meals a day plus snacks, we're eating almost every 3 hours. So we're never throughout the course of our entire day ever getting back to that homeostasis where we can kind of focus again on the repair and maintenance and cleanup of our cells. So what Mimeo is doing in that situation is that it's more or less behaving as a counterbalance, right? So you get a lot of stimulation of these pro-aging fed pathways. And what Mimeo is going to do is it's going to help stimulate the fasting beneficial anti-aging pathways at the same time to help kind of restore that homeostatic balance. But it's not going to, provide the energy restriction benefits that normal fasting would do. And it's also, trying to overcome a negative rather than just boosting a positive. So if you were to take Mimeo while intermittent fasting, that's more or less the natural state that the molecules will be operating in. They don't have any problems to overcome. They can just kind of do their jobs more efficiently and really supercharge those benefits. But it's not going to be it's not going to be the same when you're taking Mimeo with a meal as like a true 36-hour fast. We also identified, within the larger data set that there were over 300 molecules that were significantly upregulated during a 36-hour fast, right? And we found this very powerful combination of 4 of those molecules that could recreate a lot of these cellular benefits of fasting, but that still leaves, hundreds of other molecules that aren't represented in our formula and might have their own really interesting and unique effects. We just don't know about them yet. So Mimeo is not fully recreating what's happening in the body during a fast or the energy restriction components of it. So those deeper states of fasting are going to be more powerful. But the caveat to that is you have to actually do the fasting if you want those benefits, right? And a lot of people can't do that, right? A 36-hour fast is really, really daunting. Even a 24-hour fast, right? Like a 1 meal a day kind of schedule is really daunting for most people. And let alone a 48, 72 multi-day, 5-day fast kind of situation. So that's where Mimeo is really coming in and providing that value, is that we can help give you some of those beneficial effects of fasting without actually having to change your diet and lifestyle. And that's what we saw in our clinical study, right? This 8 weeks of Mimeo supplementation without any other changes, we're able to produce these really significant metabolic effects.
What are your thoughts for like an athletic population where, training might tend to interfere with the concept of intermittent fasting or, being able to do that because you need the calories when you kind of need the calories, you need to eat more than, just a couple meals a day. What are your thoughts on how this might benefit the longevity of an athlete?
I think this would be definitely beneficial for the longevity of an athlete, especially as you said, when they have to adhere to a pretty strict and robust nutritional regimen, right? A 72-hour fast is really not going to be feasible for a high-performing elite athlete, right? So something like Mimeo can be really beneficial there. And what we have seen anecdotally and in a couple of clinical studies is that the PEA that's in Mimeo has been shown to be helpful for exercise performance as well as recovery. So the pain relief, discomfort relief elements of the palmisoil ethanolamide can be really helpful for reducing muscle soreness, right? Or just even helping people kind of like get that extra rep in, get that extra set in, because there's not as much of that like muscle pain feedback, right? So you can get higher strength outputs. And that's, on the anecdotal side, something that we hear a lot, especially from older men who are taking Mimeo, is that they see strength increases in the gym. They can run faster or harder or longer. The story that I like to tell about that is one of our investors was trying out Mimeo before he actually invested in the company. He was like, all right, does this work? Are these guys legit? So he took Mimeo before going on a cycle ride that he was doing with a bunch of his friends on a course that he's done before. And he told us that, he was able to like pretty immediately feel it within an hour of taking it and set a personal record on that course, like beat out all of his friends. And after that, he was like, okay, yeah, like I'm hooked. Like this was great. I want to keep this going. Right. So that's kind of how we could be impacting the the athletic and the performance side of things as well. And that makes sense when you think about, again, like what Mimeo is doing at a biochemical cellular level, like optimizing this metabolic function, making sure that your cells are running clean, that we're reducing all of the damage that can be coming from mitochondrial overactivation during these states of exercise, right? All of that oxidative damage, the reactive oxygen species that can come out of over-indexing on energy production during intense bouts of exercise.
Yeah, it seems like it could boost both the overload effect as well as the recovery effect. You can do more training, and in the same vein, you can still kind of recover more from that greater amount of training, which means you're going to have a greater adaptation in the long run.
Right, exactly. You're going to produce energy more efficiently. There's going to be less damage that comes from that energy production, and you're going to be turning on better cellular repair mechanisms all at the same time, right? So really focusing on just keeping your cells healthy, active, and functional for as long as possible.
So how do you recommend that individuals incorporate Mimeo into their daily routine for the most optimal result?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that you can pretty easily use Mimeo as a fasting mimetic, right? You can take it with food, get those same benefits of fasting, and then help to kind of reduce those negative impacts of the postprandial state that we were talking about before, kind of those, the sluggishness that can happen post-meal, the bloating that can happen post-meal, the brain fog that can happen post-meal, right? That like afternoon slump is very real. So that's one way that you can use Mimeo, and that's typically how people use it, right? They come to us because they want to get the benefits of fasting, but without actually having to change their lifestyle. And it's perfect for that. It can also be, of course, used as a fasting enhancer, right? If you're doing these shorter term fasts where it's more typical 16/8 style intermittent fasting, or even one meal a day, right? Anything less than 36 hours. Mimeo can be helpful to not only kind of supercharge the benefits of your shorter term fasts by giving you molecules, from these later stages of fasting, but also can help to make fasting easier, right? One of the primary difficulties with fasting is just the hunger and the energy and the cognition element of those early stages of fasting. So Mimeo can really help to serve as a bridge to help make fasting easier by suppressing appetite, enhancing cognition, keeping your energy levels higher.
So are there specific populations, and we talked a little bit about athletes and you mentioned older adults, but I'm thinking like diabetics, obese individuals, young, old, are there special populations that might benefit more or the most from supplementing with Mimeo?
That's a great question as well. And that's one that we don't necessarily have an answer to right now. When you look at the clinical evidence of the individual molecules, especially OEA, OEA is really, really good for a lot of various metabolic conditions. So it's been assessed in prediabetes, it's been assessed in obesity, it's been assessed in non-alcoholic fatty liver disorder, in PCOS, and it's shown really great benefits to a lot of metabolic markers and functional markers as well in all of those cases. So lots of balancing of glucose levels, insulin levels, HbA1c levels, cholesterol levels of all kinds, including decreasing LDL and increasing HDL, which is the good cholesterol versus the bad cholesterol, helping to increase these antioxidant capacities, these anti-inflammatory effects, kind of like what we saw in our study with Mimeo, but in more of a disease context, right? So folks with metabolic conditions could probably really benefit from, adding OEA as an adjunct or Mimeo as an adjunct, right? And then in that same vein, the palmitil ethanolamide with its kind of, discomfort, pain relief effects, along with its anti-inflammatory effects, can be really helpful for things like, an autoimmune condition or arthritis or osteoarthritis, something that has a pain element to it. It's been shown to be really helpful in diabetic neuropathy as well. So those are some of the populations that could get benefit from the molecules that are in the Mimeo formulation. Of course, as a supplement, I can't say those things officially,
Yeah.
right? I'm not allowed to treat, prevent, or delay any disease, but it could still be helpful for those cellular health effects as well as kind of these symptom relief effects, I would say.
And I appreciate too that you're not making claims beyond the literature, which
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of supplement companies do. So.
No, yeah, everything that we do here at Mimeo, and that's part of me, being a PhD scientist founder, right? Is that everything that we do is always going to be very above board, very transparent, and very scientific because I can't imagine running a company another way, right? I've been indoctrinated by pharma for so long. Like, this is how you do things, this is how you prove it out. You do the clinical studies, you provide evidence over and over and over again, and that's how you find something that actually works. And ultimately, it's a harder road, but it's one that provides you with the most benefit, right? At the end of that road, you are going to get to a product that actually works and actually provides value to people. And if you can do that, then you will be a successful business, right? The dark side of the supplement industry is very much like, yeah, we can get by on our branding. We don't have to create anything new or interesting, and we don't necessarily have to provide the benefit to people that we say that we're providing. But those companies are going to be flashes in the pan, right? If they're not going to provide actual value to you, then they're just not going to work long term. And we want Mimeo to be a trusted, health partner for you and to actually provide value. And it's not just for you. I'll say this selfishly, right? Like, I want my product to work too, right? Like, I want to get these benefits. This has been my life's work. This has been what I've been working towards. So, I want it just as badly as you do, and I'm going to be the one to make sure it happens.
So what are the next steps for research and further clinical trials for the company?
Yeah. So now that we have done this clinical study, then the next is an even bigger clinical study, right? That's kind of just how the science world works, is that you prove that it works in a small population, you prove that it works in a medium-sized population, you prove that it works in a larger population. And what we'll probably do for the larger population study is, go something in the range of like a 100 person, 120 person study and look at how Mimeo affects a metabolic condition, probably metabolic syndrome specifically, where you have this cluster of symptoms where you have high glucose levels, low cholesterol levels, high triglyceride levels, increased adiposity, waist circumference, things like that. So folks that could really use a metabolic boost and this metabolic benefit that we've shown that Mimeo can provide, and then apply that to them and see how that all works out, probably at a 8 to 12 week study length. But then beyond that, with the current Mimeo formulation, we also have our back-end biomimetic research platform. And what we're going to do there is essentially look at all these other interesting regenerative states of the body, right? So fasting was our first one, but next up will probably be exercise, and looking at how does endurance exercise, how does, the more like fast twitch sprinting exercise affect the body? And are there unique molecules produced there that we can use to help recreate these beneficial effects of exercise? And that's really what Mimeo is designed to be for the long term, is that biomimetic supplement company. So just like we ran this with fasting, we'll run it with exercise, we'll run it with meditation, we'll run it with sleep, we'll run it with cold exposure, and really try to find these unique clinically derived health and longevity molecules and formulations so that we can truly, kind of unlock the power of our biology and put it at our fingertips.
You're not going to do away with my exercise, are you?
No. Yeah, we'll see. That's the thing, right? Is that it's not a full recreation, and it never will be, but we can mimic some of the benefits. Just like with fasting, we're never going to be able to, erase calories, right? But we can still help tweak that source code in the cells to help them promote these beneficial pathways and effects, even when we're eating. And same thing for exercise. We're never going to be able to recreate the energy restriction effects that happen during exercise. We're never going to be able to recreate the, micro tearing of the muscles that happen because of the actual physical stress. But we can identify these, interesting beneficial cellular health molecules or things that can enhance strength and, improve recovery, kind of like we already found with the fasting mimetic.
Now, I've already heard that a glass of wine is like an hour at the gym, so somebody's got you beat there.
It's true, yeah. I mean, a general rule of thumb is that for every mile you walk or run, that's around 100 calories. So if you're saying like a typical glass of wine, it's like 150 to 200 calories, something like that. So that's 2 miles on a treadmill.
Yeah, so you're actually putting the calories in rather than burning them. That's why I always loved when I heard that article. But it is interesting that, there's that possibility for maybe parts of the population where traditional exercise isn't at their disposal. It's people, paraplegics, quadriplegics that could get some benefits that can help with their health and their longevity that they could get from exercise. But since they're unable to exercise, they're going to get some limited benefit from being able to do a more biomimetic pathway. So
Right.
That's kind of cool. I'm excited for that.
Exactly. And I think that going back to the question that you had earlier of who can really benefit, especially from these biomimetic technologies that we're pushing forward, are a lot of elderly folks, right? So people who fasting would be very beneficial for them, but they're at the stage where they have to worry about, muscle wasting, sarcopenia. They have to worry about frailty. They have to worry about not losing too much weight or too much bone mass or muscle mass or whatever it is. So a fasting mimetic is perfect because it's activating, that longevity bio program, but without actually having to risk these negative effects that you can get from the energy restriction elements of fasting. And then, like you said, same with exercise, right? There are plenty of people who could really benefit from actual, exercise and strength training and resistance training and all that, but are physically unable to do it, or they've gotten to the point where, they have a muscle wasting problem or a bone wasting problem or some kind of frailty, right? And so if we can provide even 40% of the benefit of traditional exercise, I think that would be really impactful.
Or even like 10% can be impact. I mean, any percentage above zero is going to be somewhat impactful for an individual who can't exercise. So
I like to be
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So the study was on healthy overweight in adults. How do these results transfer or generalize to, say, a younger or more healthy weight population?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the best answer that I have for that is going back to our second clinical study with the Mimeo formulation. That was performed in young, healthy people. And that's where we saw that we could mitigate some of those negative effects of the postprandial state, where we could recreate these benefits of fasting even during a meal. So we know that even within young, healthy people, we can provide immediate metabolic benefit there. I will say that, as with any intervention, right? This isn't unique to Mimeo. The unhealthier you are, the easier it is to create health benefits, right? And the healthier you are, the harder it is to create health benefits. So if we were to look at this same study in Olympic trained athletes with 8 weeks of supplementation with Mimeo, we might not have been able to see the same level of beneficial effects, right? I'm sure that we would have seen something, but probably not the same kind of deltas that we're working with here. And then on the flip side of that, if we had been working with a metabolic disease population like type 2 diabetes or like NAFLD, right? We probably could have seen even more impact there. So what I think is most impactful about the Mimeo formulation is that it's helping you stay within that healthy range, right? It's really helping you to maintain a healthy metabolism and, and that's over time, right? To really like combat these forces of aging to make sure that you're staying within the health.
Yeah. So it's back to the aging well. I mean, it's not something that a healthy individual starting young is going to see immediate effects, but over the 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you suddenly start to see how you are separating from your peers that are not doing the same things that you're doing to age well.
Right, exactly. That's something I think that people have lost perspective of a little bit in the longevity game in general is that longevity is not about rejuvenation and regeneration or even like increasing cell turnover, right? That's something that you see, especially in the skin and beauty industries a lot, is that you're like, oh, we're going to like enhance cellular turnover and like cellular renewal. That's actually, from a scientific perspective, a very pro-aging effect, right? Cells only have a certain number of times that they can divide before they become, dysfunctional or too damaged to survive. And that's called the Hayflick limit. So the faster your cells replicate and divide, the faster they're going to reach the Hayflick limit, which means the faster they're going to fall into dysfunction and repair and then eventual death. So anti-aging and longevity is actually about maintenance of that cell for as long as possible without having to have it divide. And that's really what we're going for here, is that if you can stretch out the cellular lifespan, then that's going to eventually lead to a stretching out of an organismal lifespan as well. So like that whole body effect is really going to be coming from the cell itself.
Yeah, I think we've kind of jumped too much on the longevity bandwagon and are kind of missing the point of what we're trying to do in living longer, that it really needs to be that health span approach, not just longevity. Because, yeah, we're getting people to live longer, but we're doing it at really the expense of their health. Exactly. They're just staying unhealthy longer.
Right, exactly. And that's what's known as the healthspan lifespan, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the scariest part about aging. That's always the argument that we get from people who aren't in the longevity space. We're like, why would I want to live an extra 10 years after I'm 85, right? Like I'd rather just die. and that because of that fear of like, when do you how long do you live in dysfunction and disease and like, potential pain, right? After you're like no longer healthy and youthful and vibrant anymore. And I think that, to your point, Jeff, the real thing that we're trying to do here in longevity is not to necessarily extend lifespan just, for the purpose of extending lifespan, right? What we want to do is, and what my goal is in the healthy aging and longevity space, is to just live my life as healthy as possible for as long as possible, right? Like I don't want to fall into disrepair and disease and, all that stuff. I want to essentially be running a marathon when I'm 95. And as soon as I cross the finish line, just like suddenly drop dead. That's like the best thing that I can think of as an example of the goal that we're all trying to achieve in the healthy aging space.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. And we talk a lot about the 4 ages. You have the first age is kind of that year of those years of development and dependency, up through usually high school, end of college. And then you have the second age is where you're kind of that age of independence. You're building up wealth. You're starting a family. Third age is that age where you're now able to capitalize on the finances that you've built up over the period of time. You're in retirement. You can travel. You can do all these fun things that you couldn't do when you were having kids. And then fourth age is that age of decline and decrepitude. And we really want to bring that fourth age to being as close to nothing as possible. Exactly. And like you said, you cross the finish line and fall over dead. That is like 0 fourth age.
Yep.
And that's the perfect way to go. Maybe I don't know that I'd want to necessarily die on the finish line. I'd rather kind of maybe go home, sit down in my recliner, pop a beer or something,
there you go.
And then just gently go to sleep.
Yeah, we like that too, Yeah. As long as it's quick and we don't see it coming, that's ideal.
So speaking of, and I asked you this question before, are you still aging well? What are you doing to keep aging well? I know you look like you're 20, but I know you're older than that.
That's true. I am 34. So we'll take that. I like this. My general thing for aging well is I'm still doing 1 meal a day. That's my schedule. So even with Mimeo, right, I still like to intermittent fast, and I find that it supports me there. So I'll take Mimeo and green tea in the morning. That basically helps me get through my entire day. Very productive, very focused, and not thinking about food. And then at the end of the day, I kind of get to shut all of that off and then go immediately into, okay, great. Now I've got, my entire day's worth of calories at the end of it. I can kind of, do whatever I want, eat whatever I want, kind of have a food reward, as I like to call it, So that's kind of how I like to incorporate intermittent fasting into my life. And then, exercise, strength training, that's the big thing for me. I go to the gym, 5 times a week, and I focus pretty solely on just weightlifting and strength training, just because we know that muscle mass going into old age is one of the best indicators for health span and longevity. And then beyond that, it's less wear and tear on your joints over time. So you're producing less damage, especially if you're doing like more machine work or controlled things, cable exercises, things like that. So that's kind of like my big thing, right? Like I'm very into the supplement side of things with Mimeo, and then traditional diet and exercise. And the equation is not that complicated.
No,
luckily.
it's not. That's why it's easy in my field. Exercise science is, it can be really narrowed down to about 6 principles and you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I found in the nutrition space too, right? Getting my PhD in nutrition, I was like, wow, I can't believe that I spent, these past 7 years basically to learn what I already knew in first grade, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, eat your fruits, eat your vegetables, colorful things, don't eat too much, stay away from red meats and processed foods. It's pretty much it's as good as we have, and it's probably as good as we'll have for a very long time.
So Dr. Rhodes, how can our listeners connect with you and learn a little bit more about Mimeo?
Yep. If they want to learn about Mimeo, they can come to our website. That's MIMIO health.com. If they want to learn more about me, my bio, and the rest of the team's bio are on the website as well. Or
in this episode of the Aging Well podcast, my guest is Dr. Christopher Rhodes, co-founder and CEO of Mimio Health. In episode 196, Dr. Rhodes shared insights into how fasting, fasting mimicking diets can profoundly influence cellular processes, boost metabolic health, and potentially extend lifespan. He returns in this episode to update us on the research into fasting biomimetics and how these may improve hunger, appetite control, glucose levels, cholesterol levels, and more. Whether you're curious about optimizing your health or looking for innovative ways to age well, this episode offers valuable perspectives from a leader in the field. So thank you for joining us. Is there anything that we missed that you kind of need to finalize to tell our listeners and viewers?
No, I think that is everything. Got it really well covered.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on, and I'm trying to think how long ago you were on the last time, but
whenever the next study is.
As soon as more information comes out, just let me know and we'll get you back on here. So again, I've really enjoyed this, and just keep doing what you're doing and keep aging well.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.